Welcome to the Reluctant Somm. This is your host Chris with Alex Hawes from Alexander Steakhouse SF. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, cheers, Chris.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. We've got two wines. One wine, not a blind, well, a blind-ish, but do you like it is the question. That's the only blind that you have to answer. And then a wine that you brought, which I'm super excited about, which we can dive into in a little bit. But to start things off, Alex, I have known you for 2 years now. And in the whole time that I've known you, you've been at Alexander Steakhouse. And I think that you've done, not that the list wasn't in a great spot before, just you've kind of added a lot more depth, complexity, and kind of broadened the selection a little bit more than I think it was a little bit more hyper-focused on Napa Cab or like bigger producer stuff. But I don't really know where you worked at before that. Do you want to kind of just give us, I know you're from Paso or that area. Do you want to kind of just give us like a rundown from not necessarily day one, but.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I grew up in Atascadero, so very close to Paso Robles, but not in a wine-focused family by any means. Although I will share that my one kind of wine-related memory growing up there, my mom was buds with Tobin James.
Oh.
So I have memories of going to the winery and all the parents getting inside, really enjoying themselves, a.k.a. getting blitzed.
Yeah.
And all the kids rolling around on the front lawn. And Tobin would, I think he was from Ohio because he had a Cincinnati Bengals helmet. And he'd let me like put the helmet
so
on
funny.
and stuff. So that's like my one kind of key core memory wine thing. And now, of course, like, I haven't had those wines in I don't know how long. And like, I think most of us in the industry associate that with like, okay, that's like, whew, those are some really intense wines
Punchy.
that most of us don't typically, at least that are in the business now, gravitate toward. But, I think he still like pushed that appellation, helped push that appellation into what it is now.
Yeah.
So anyways, I grew up in Atascadero in Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo County area. I lived in Monterey. I went to school there. And me dropping out of school coincided with me starting working in restaurants, probably a pretty common theme, but being able to pay my way across the board. And the first restaurant I worked at was an extremely busy, very touristy restaurant on Cannery Row, where summer days in a 10-hour shift, we would do 2,400 covers.
Oh my God.
So, and I worked there for 3 years, and I thought it was a fun time. So you really learn how to do the basics really well.
Yep.
And when you're in, you learn how to bartend in a place where you're putting out drinks for 200 people an hour, and you've got, 4 blenders, and, you learn how to be efficient.
Multitasking.
And you learn how to multitask. And I made some of my, best friends in my life there, and feel very fortunate to say that. Although I'm very glad that I don't work in that place anymore. But I am grateful that that's where I started, because
I can feel the PTSD still.
yeah, it's there for sure. And then I moved to San Francisco with a couple friends, blind with no jobs, and just went, door to door thinking, wow, I worked at this really busy restaurant. Everybody's going to want, and nobody wanted me,
so funny.
right? Because I worked at this mega corporate tourist chain restaurant, and this would have been 2010.
Yeah.
So like at that point, nobody wanted anything to do with that.
Yeah.
And so I was very lucky. I had a cousin that lived here at the time, and she introduced me to the general manager. His name was Brian Stillman of EOS in Coal Valley,
Okay.
Which then turned into Padrecito, and Padrecito recently closed. So anyhow, EOS was kind of near the end of its tenure in Coal Valley, but that got my foot in the door, and it was a wine bar. I was not a wine person. I didn't drink wine. I didn't know anything about wine. There were a few people there that would share little tidbits with me, because they said, hey, San Francisco is a city that likes wine, so if you can learn a little bit about it. And I thought, okay. So I spent a little bit of time with it, but my tenure there, it was only around a year. The restaurant ended up closing. And not that long after that, I started working at Morton Steakhouse. So another big chain restaurant known for doing huge amount of covers.
Huge covers,
I started there before they were bought by the mega conglomerate Landry's, but I was definitely there for a good part of that takeover. another restaurant that you did a lot of covers, and you learned how to be very self-sufficient. And it was another restaurant that when I started working there, people were like, what is this kid doing here?
Yeah.
You know, because I was like 23, 24. And I didn't know.
And they're all career, right? They've been there for decades.
These guys, most of like the senior servers were in their 40s with families. And I mean, I remember my trainer telling me, he was like, do you know how long and how hard I had to work to get this job? And like, I could just feel the resentment in his voice. So, I just like put my head down for like a year and a half and
earned it.
Just tried to like people please the guests, people please the staff around me.
That's so funny.
And just pick up a little bit, and obviously extremely Napa-centric wine list. Yeah. But at the time, it was, for me, I was working on a list that had 350. I was like, I didn't even know there were 350 winemakers at the time.
That's funny.
Anyhow, I worked there for a long time, and I essentially worked there as a sommelier, and I got to know the list very, very well, to the point where they never had like a somm on the floor. And the wine director wasn't involved on the floor like that. So I would oftentimes be who the other servers or bartenders or whoever would ask to go over and talk about the wines. But I didn't have any formal training.
Right.
If you'd asked me back then, talk about structure in the wine, like I wouldn't have been able to. I could just talk about the producer. I think I had some understanding of what like quality kind of was. Sure. But it was mostly a lot of BS, and it worked.
It works.
It worked at that restaurant.
Stories sell.
Yeah, and I wouldn't try and say something that I didn't know.
Yeah,
I'd just be like, hey, this is really good, and it's big, full body. It's what you want.
Yeah.
And so I was there for almost 8 years because the money was really good and the schedule was flexible.
Yeah.
And then my exit there led me to going to Murad.
Oh.
So that was when, and this would have been in 2019, when the doors started opening up for me like, oh, you thought you knew a lot. Thought you were hot shit.
Even wider.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I had this big understanding of the San Francisco restaurant scene and, the wine world. Yeah. And I was like, these wines over here are what you want to drink, and that's it. That was what my mindset was. And then I went here, and I was like,
Moroccan
they have
food.
Greek wines by the glass? Like, they've like, what Sharmula? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
And they had, they had a real wine program, and Tara Patrick was running the program at the time, and Jose and Ruth were a couple of the somms there, and they did, wine education, training. Like, these were things that I did not.
Yeah.
You did not get at Morton's or anywhere else that I'd ever worked at. It was never formal like that. And it started percolating for me. And it was a hard place to work. The standards were really high, and it was pre-COVID. But I didn't quite work there a year before I transitioned once again. But I mean, the amount that I learned was probably more than my entire career combined before then. I transitioned because, we had our first kid. My wife and I had our first kid and wanted to work closer to home. And I got the opportunity to work at Fiorella on Clement Street.
Oh, I did know that you worked at Fiorella.
Yeah. And that was amazing because it was like, getting to work at, kind of a mom and pop feeling place. The guests were always stoked to be there because they knew they were getting such great value and they were neighborhood and everybody knew each other. It was the first time I guess EOS had some of that feel to it. But Fiorella, I was with that company for 3 years. And I worked at the Clement and helped open the Sunset locations. Awesome. And it was during COVID that I started latching on to more formal education wine-wise and feeling like, I think this might be something that I want to do as a career. Right. So then when I got the opportunity with Alexander's, I took it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And sorry, I feel like I spoke for a long time there.
No, that's fine. Okay, totally fine. No, that's what this is for, right? And then 2 years at Alexander's, and I mean, how do you feel like that development has gone? Do you feel like you're learning significantly more because you're probably tasting a lot more than you have in any of the other positions that you've been in?
Yeah, I mean, easily what you just said.
Yeah.
I would say that me getting that job, like I worked hard to get it and put myself out there. But first and foremost, like I think it's a product of COVID. Like I think if COVID hadn't happened, there's no way that I would have gotten some of those opportunities to get some formal wine education, and B, I don't think I would have been considered for that job at the time.
Yeah.
But I think with the dearth of hospitality professionals, you know, people had to slide in and take place. So I don't know if I would have had the requisite bulk of knowledge, maybe enough experience, but I don't know about the bulk of knowledge needed that maybe that position would have required beforehand.
Yeah.
But I've really tried to take the bull by the horns, and I mean, my producer knowledge is like, or at least I feel like it's much better than it was before. And I mean, that's just, you know, I also get an opportunity to work with a lot of blue chip producers. You know, I get to open wines that like not a lot of people get to open all the time. Especially in like the Bordeaux camp.
Right.
So it's been really humbling being there. And once again, I just do I just try and be myself with the guests. And I was kind of mentioning to you before we came on air, like my job is to make them feel comfortable.
Right.
And most of the time, especially if it's first or second time that I'm working with someone, I'm trying to give them great value. And, you know, if they're kind enough to give me I'm looking in the 300 to 400 range, I'm usually looking at the low end of that or even under that at something that I've opened recently that I know is really hitting and is what they're looking for. So, but yeah, I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity and to still be there. And I'm just doing my best to hold serve. And I did have great predecessors and people that set me up and put me in a really good spot. And the program has been there for a long time.
Right.
So no delusions of grandeur and like I don't walk around like, oh, this is my list.
I created this. Yeah.
No. I mean, like, I think when you take over a program or start a program, there's always going to be, you're going to leave a footprint in a way, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way I look at it. It's
echo.
like, okay, like of course there's going to be some wines on the list that I like. And of course there's going to be some producers on the list that like I gravitate toward selling. And like, that's just a part of it.
Yeah.
But I think I was set up for success in many, many ways by all the guys that were there before me, all the people that were there before me.
Right. So, right. Yeah. It's, I mean, you know, you touched on a lot of really great points. And I mean, one of the ones that really spoke to me a lot was kind of like removing yourself and kind of like checking your pride to build or to enrich a program or to, you know, restructure a program or however you'd like to phrase it. And, you know, thinking about like what's the best for the guest, right? I mean, anybody can go in and fill a list full of wines that they love, right? But you're not going to go to a steakhouse and have a list riddled with white Burgundy, right? Like you could, but you need a couple things that actually go with the steak, right? Do you feel like that has been something that has been really easy to consider from the very beginning? Or do you feel like that's something that you have to like remind yourself of every day?
I think I have to remind myself of it because oftentimes when whoever comes and pours me something, I'm like, wow, this is, I'd love to drink this, this wine. And then I'm like, okay, what's my clientele coming in here? And like, so I do allow myself some of those wines to be on the list. And usually most of the time, those wines are coming in at price points that are, for the everyday person can afford.
A bit more appropriate.
Which generally I associate with like under $100 on the list.
Yeah.
I feel like if people are walking in there, they're already willing to spend a certain amount, whether it's a special occasion or, and if they're not bringing a bottle, like if it's Joe and Jane coming in and they're not bringing a bottle, half the time it's probably because they forgot it at home. Right. So there has to be some stuff they're familiar with, but if there isn't, like, there has to be something in that whatever $80, $90, $70 range that they're still going to be happy with.
Yeah.
And even if that's not Napa Cabernet Sauvignon, maybe it's got some of the same structural characteristics. Or maybe it's just something that I, don't feel like, even if it's not by the glass, I can just pop open and be like, hey, if for some reason you don't like this, like,
Yeah.
it's all good.
Yeah.
We'll move and I'll educate the staff with it, or I'll, sell it by the glass over the next day or so. So I just try and take the pressure off of those people.
Yeah.
Especially because we need more of those people.
We need more of those people. Yeah. I feel like, when you're mentioning like the sub $100 price range, I feel like that's what's missing in a lot of places that you go to nowadays. You go in, all the wines by the glass, to order them by the bottle are like $60 to $100. And then every wine by the bottle is $100 plus, right? It becomes almost like uncomfortable. And I know, like, in a way, you have to swing for the fence because you want to make a big sale. Because let's face it, expenses in San Francisco are high. Minimum wage is expensive. Rent is expensive. Credit card fees on all your POS systems, everything's expensive, right? So you want to sell a big bottle, but also, like, at the same time, if I walk in and I don't know anything about wine and I go like, it's a steakhouse, I should get a nice bottle of red. And I open the list and it's like $120 a bottle. And I'm by myself or I'm with, a date and I don't really want to spend $120 on a bottle of wine. I'll go, should we do a cocktail? Sure. And then maybe get a wine by the glass, maybe. Yeah. Right. And it's almost like, in a way, it's pushing people the opposite direction. So I praise that idea of like keeping a lot of things sub 100 that are delicious and safe and that like people can enjoy. I mean, I've always tried to think of like when I'm building a wine program and I'm doing my by the glass, Cab, Chard, Pinot, those are all expensive, right? Because that's what people know, A, and B, those wines are just more expensive. And like the less expensive wines, I always try to put on something like fun and interesting that still goes with the cuisine, right? Like at Ozumo, I had like Marcus Molitor Riesling for like $12 a glass. And that was like our cheapest white. And I just knew in my head that like, if somebody comes in and they're on a budget, they can just say like, I want a roll of sushi and I want a glass of white wine, the cheapest glass of white wine. I just want it to pair. Like, it doesn't need to be like me trying to train them on something or me needing to like, impose my will upon them. It's just like, if they're just shotgunning blind, I just want it to be like a perfect thing, or as close as it could be.
Sure.
Which is impossible almost.
Now, I don't want to give the impression that our list is made up. Unfortunately, it's not made up of wines mostly under $100.
Yeah.
It's around 850 selections, and like there's a lot of very expensive wine on the list. And that's the way I inherited it, and that's in a lot of ways the way it's going to stay.
Well, and that's probably what sells.
Yeah, and those wines do sell, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a clientele of people that have been coming there for over 10 years that they know they can find those blue chip Bordeaux producers or blue chip Burgundy producers, and they look for them.
Yeah.
And but I'm trying to slowly, and it might be a Rus Jimenez, Mary Taylor, Manchuela wine.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever heard of the varietal but man, it's really good.
It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah. And at whatever, $40 or $50 for the bottle, like you'll feel great about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think to me, when I think about like Alexander's Steakhouse, I mean, you guys have a la carte and you also have a tasting menu, right? And so then you also offer obviously wine by the glass, but then you also offer like a wine pairing.
Sure.
And I think to me, I was always really surprised the first time I went in there. I guess I wasn't always surprised. The first time I went in there, I was surprised that you have a lot of seafood dishes actually, right? Like maybe not the first half, but the first third of the tasting menu is pretty.
Yeah, we definitely have some at the moment. Maybe not as much as the last time that you went through.
Yeah.
But we do at times can have some heavy seafood, and there's always some.
Yeah.
That's included.
And do you feel like it's challenging to pick wines to pair with those courses for some of the more regular clientele that you have? Are they open-minded to it, or are they just like, I just want cab?
Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking tasting menu, and they're having the pairings, usually when people are doing that, there's a certain amount of like, okay, they're excited to try something
trust,
new.
Open-mindedness.
There's some, and we list the pairings also.
Oh,
so
that's
if it's
nice.
someone which I don't think a lot of places don't do that, and maybe part of that is because it's a lot of extra work there's a lot of extra work just in general, but just to print the thing on the menu
Yeah.
and reprint it that
Yep.
day. It takes work. You also have to have some collab with the chef and sommelier or whoever's doing the pairing,
Yep.
right? And then, you know, and by that I mean like they have to know more than 2 hours before the shift so that they can actually curate a
Yep.
pairing.
Yep.
I mean, I think at 3 Michelin star restaurants, they're doing it a week ahead of time
Yeah.
and tasting like many wines a lot of the time. But at most restaurants, that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
At most restaurants, if you're lucky to have a few hours.
Yeah. You normally find out in pre-shift.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And it's not that way. That was kind of how it was when I started there. And it's not anymore. Now, like, I feel like I'm getting much more advanced notice on it, which is nice.
That's great.
And I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So thank you, back of the house,
Yeah.
for accommodating me in that way. But so like with pairings, people trust, like you said, people are, you know, willing to try the Atlante Canary Islands with their Wagyu tataki and ponzu, you know, like have some white wine with your red meat and like change the way that you think about things.
I love it.
And I generally like allow myself like one nerdy, you know, pairing like that in a 6 or 7 course menu.
Right.
And, you know, give them some standbys and then a couple that are, you know, you always have, you know, a Riesling in your back pocket because it's just a cheat code, basically.
Yeah.
Now, we're not that, you know, when I worked at Murad, like we had suggested pairings for every dish on the menu.
Right.
Suggested B2G pairings. And you had to know them. And, you know, at Alexander's, sure, I have those in my head. I have put them out there for the staff occasionally. The times that it comes up, rare. Most of the time, if people aren't doing pairings, they're either looking for something comfortable by the glass,
Right.
or they're like really excited to order that big bottle of red.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there will always be the suggestion of, would you like some champagne or Chablis or something with that caviar? Do you want this to open up a little bit over here beforehand? But it's not my job to tell them, no, you can't drink your...
You shouldn't have caviar.
And I'm not... And I know people in the industry, front and back of the house, that get extremely upset when that happens.
Yeah.
And I'm just not one of those people.
Yeah.
I'm just like, you know what? The way I look at it is it's an opportunity to sell a second bottle of the wine that they're enjoying.
Yeah.
If you're going to start drinking it now, cool.
Yeah.
And you love it that much, then I can sell you another one.
That's a great point. That's a good way to think
So
about it.
like, while it is my job to maybe like gently nudge them in a direction that like will help the wine and the food show better.
Yeah.
I'm not dogmatic about it. Sure. I don't want to make people feel bad about it. I will make a very simple suggestion, and then after that, like, they get to drink what they want to drink.
Ride it out into the sunset. Yeah. That was a big thing for me at Ozumo that I never really struggled with. I mean, people could do whatever they want. I feel similarly, right? It's your money. It's your taste. It's whatever you like, right? But we would have so many times people would come in and say, like, I'll get 4 California rolls and a glass of, you know, young Napa Cab. And they would just sit there and they would, like, just cover the sushi in soy sauce and eat it and just chug Napa Cab. And I was just like, I don't know how it could be pleasant. Obviously, if they enjoy it, like, good for them. But in a way, it was just like, I don't get it. But at the same point, like, I did have people come in and order, like, you know, the fun part is when somebody orders that little gem or like that wine that you really love, you don't have a chance to touch the table. And they're like, you see it come out in the well or into wherever the wine station is. I go, who ordered that table? Oh, I'm going to go talk to them. And you get so excited because you know that they read the list and that they understood like your thought process behind putting that wine on the menu. That's got to be one of the most exciting things for me.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, so let's see. You recently went to Paso Robles. Well, you went home, and you had an opportunity to go to one winery or a couple wineries.
We just went to one this time.
One. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
on very late notice.
That happens. And how was that? I mean, I don't think that I know. I've been to Paso once when I was really young. I mean, what's the vibe down there? I mean, we're so obsessed with like Napa vintages and like what's smoked, what's not smoked. I mean, how have things been down in Paso over the last few years?
Yeah, I don't think that as far as 2017, 2020 smoke tape vintages, I don't think that's something that they had to worry about anywhere near as much.
Right.
And it briefly came up at the tasting that I went to. I kind of was like, it didn't hit you guys the way that it hit up north, right? And they were like, no, like it wasn't something. I'm sure that there have been times where, other small fires around, but it wasn't that way for them. As far as the general scene, to me, that's there's kind of two camps in my eyes. There's we want to push this in a different direction camp, which I think is spearheaded by, old school Tables Creek. I think that Union Sacre is doing some fun stuff. Jornada.
Yep.
I love those wines that they're making. And had a really nice lunch at their little pasta spot, Edo.
Oh,
which
yeah.
you should go
to
if you haven't. In Tin City.
Tin City.
Yeah.
Tin City.
Yeah. And I think many more. I'm not going to mention all the producers, but those are some of them that I can think of that are in that camp. And Union Sacre sources a lot of fruit from down in Santa Barbara County too.
Yeah.
But they're trying to push it away from Big Zin, Big Cab camp. And then the other camp is we're going to keep doing these big wines, but we're going to make them really, really well, and we're going to try and build this into Napa too.
Right. Yeah.
And growing up down there, I would have never thought, Paso Robles was a place that people stopped by to get, free wine tastings and get a buzz. Yeah. Like that was, there's a lot of money up there. There's a lot of money, and they're charging, $50, $60 a tasting. Yep. So maybe not $100 a head yet.
Sure.
Although maybe there are some, I don't know. But L'Aventure is definitely one of the higher end places up there. Yeah. And I think that their tasting that they were charging was $50 for the standard, but $100 for the library tasting,
like a reserve
if you
tasting.
Will. Yeah,
that's cool.
So pretty up there for Paso Robles.
Yeah.
So, and then there is still a lot of bulk wine being made down there. That's in the valley. But in to the west, in the coastal range, in Adelaida District, in Willow Creek, and Templeton Gap, those are quality appellations with a lot of good wine. And then it's just like you get to pick like what style are you going for? Do you want fun Italian varietals from old vineyards that are going to be ripped up any day?
Yeah.
Or do you want to drink like polished Bordeaux style wines?
Yeah, the wines are really getting a lot better. I think when I was young and first getting in the industry, like Paso wine was like cool. There was a lot of great producers down there, and then it kind of fell out of favor when things got like ultra ripe. And I think like maybe Michael David and maybe kind of like before Dow was even down there, but like the Michael David Zins, like 7 Deadly Zin. I remember that was like the first one that I had.
Is that at Paso?
Yeah.
For some reason I always associated Michael David with Lodi. But
you're right.
It might be both.
No, I'm sorry. It's Lodi.
But regardless, I think it's the same. But I think that thought process is the same for both areas.
Yeah.
People associate it with what you just said.
Right.
Big, overripe Zins.
Yeah. And it used to be like, it used to be super cool. And then it just got like, I think it got too big. Things got too out of check. And then now things are really tapering back a lot. It's really amazing to me to see some of the wines coming out of there. I mean, L'Aventure is a great example, right? Like I had L'Aventure like 4 years ago for the first time, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this is a big wine. And then I had the most recent vintages, and I'm like, this is actually really solid. And I think Law Estate, that's in Paso too, right?
What is it again?
Law Estate.
I'm not going to. I don't know that one off the top of my head.
I think they're one that I had before. So I was at West Coast Wine and Cheese, RIP, on Union Street, and he would do like I think it was like bi-weekly. He would have like a winemaker in town, and there was this guy from Law Estate there, and he was pouring like it was like a Cab blend, a Syrah blend, and a Zin blend or something. And the wines were all really good, and it's all like this high-tech, gravity-fed, solar-powered winery. I mean, clearly mountains of cash went into this place. But the wines are super impressive. They were not inexpensive at all. But yeah, it's interesting. And it's nice that you put it as like two different camps. That's not a way that I thought about it in the past, but you're right. There are a lot of like people kind of challenging the norm down there right now.
Yeah, it's and I think that's good. That pushes both camps
Yeah.
to quality.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, competition breeds excellence.
Yeah. So I admit that like I get more excited about the wines that like Jornada is making.
Yeah.
Just because I've had a handful of Nebbiolos outside of Piemonte, and none of them were very good other than theirs.
Yeah.
And theirs is like, wow.
Really good.
This is amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
This is amazing fruit, and just from a vineyard that I think is or has been now not there anymore,
God,
unfortunately.
don't tell me that. Really?
Yeah, that Lunamata vineyard.
It's gone?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was they were leasing that, and it got bought out from underneath them. They bid on it, but it got bought out from underneath them. So I don't know if I'm on to say maybe 2022 is going to be the final vintage.
That's awful. All my favorite vineyards are gone. Ramey lost their Rogers Creek vineyards, the Syrah. That's some of my favorite. And John Lancaster made his Syrah was from Dave Ramey's Gap Vineyards, or Gap Rose. And I always thought those wines were super impressive. And now to know Lunamata's gone, and like, it's crazy. I mean, I guess it's kind of just the nature of the beast. But when we went to Chapelet recently, we were up there and they were talking about how Chenin Blanc used to be their most planted grape. Mm-hmm. And they had more Chenin Blanc than anybody else in Napa.
Well, it was Molly's favorite, right?
Yeah. And so then they ripped it all out and it was all gone. And then like a couple years later, she got pissed and was like, what's going on? When are we replanting the Chenin? So they planted her like 3 acres of Chenin. But I was talking to somebody the other day and there's only like, it was John Scupney from Lang and Reed, I think. I think there's like 12 acres of Chenin in Napa now or something like that, or maybe 20 or something like that. But
not much.
Super minimal. And I guess that's just kind of the way it is. And we went to Spotswood, and Spotswood is experimenting with different grapes because global warming is going to come and Cabernet Sauvignon might not survive.
Yeah. But terrifying. At least, Spotswood, they're one of the only, there's a handful of producers out there that doesn't just rip up vineyards after 20 years.
Yeah.
And they are keeping theirs around. So that'll help.
That'll
help some.
Yeah, that's
It
true.
won't help with yields, but it'll help with making good wine still, right? Isn't that funny how focused, at least to me, how focused the people that sell wine to me are like, wow, these here are like heritage vineyards and and they're almost never Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah.
They're just like, the earliest plantings you see from that are like maybe the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So it's like, hey, man, maybe you guys should keep some of those in the ground rather than ripping them up so that you can plant some more and just get yields. Insane yields out of them.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it was fascinating talking to John about Lang and Reed being an Napa producer, and the only grapes they make are Cabernet Franc and Chenin Blanc. I'm like, you could have retired forever ago, dude. Yeah. You could have just planted Cabernet Sauvignon and never had to work another day in your life. But it's like, it's truly a passion project. And also, too, you know what does really well in really warm climates? Cabernet Franc. So he might be 20 years ahead of his time in that sense. Yeah. I think we're in an interesting time with like the natural wine scene or movement really kind of taking off too. I think it's also pushing people to kind of like challenge their thoughts and challenge the norm. And whether the wines are for me or not, I don't really think is the point. They clearly have staying power. They clearly have sellability. And I think like your dual camp thought earlier, it kind of reminds me of that. It's like causing people to just all of a sudden not rest on their laurels and go like, everybody wants my cab. Everybody wants my cab. And now there's, 20% of the young population doesn't drink. The other 30% are just drinking natural wine. And now all of a sudden your consumer base is cut in half. It's wild.
Yeah, I think they've got the approach right. It's like you don't always have to be analytical and thinking about what's in the glass. Like sometimes you just want to sit back and enjoy it. So like get a good chill on it and crack it open
Yeah.
and pour it for your friends and just have fun. And also probably feel a little better because those wines tend to clock in quite a bit lower alcohol.
Lower alcohol. If you have sulfites bother you, there's a lot less sulfites, or
Right.
maybe none. Well, less.
So, I mean, and another thing that you mentioned earlier is like people drinking wine. Cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Like, am I going to fill up the Alexander Steakhouse wine list with natural wines? No, because that's not really the place for them.
Yeah, yeah.
There are some wines that are pretty naturally made, though. This wine is pretty naturally made. It's biodynamic and old vineyards, and not much for sulfites added.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not
Natty.
it's not that.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So I think there's also realizing maybe for the younger crowd, or for the crowd, I should just say the crowd that enjoys natural wines, like there can be really thoughtful and well-made wine, fine wine,
Yeah.
that checks a lot of those boxes. And it might not be no added sulfites, but other than that, it's going to pretty much meet all of what you're hoping for.
Yeah.
But they're going to add some because they want the wine to last
Yeah.
more than a year.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I won't pretend, I've never been a part of making any wine. So like, I'm not going to pretend like I know all the ins and outs of it,
Sure.
but from what I understand, it's pretty important in that regard.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
a preservative.
Yeah, we have seen kind of like a resurgence of this like no sulfite, low sulfite kind of wine drinking, and I think it's cool, and like I'm with you in the sense of like as long as people are drinking wine, great. And also I agree, like my hope is that they're gonna find producers like Jean Foyard, that they're gonna find producers like Tiberio, that they're gonna find these producers that are classic producers that are natural, or at least close enough to natural, that have integrity and have quality. And then maybe those will be gateway into the little less natural wines along the way. And we can all bridge the gap, right?
Right. But I also hear about like all people saying, well, okay, so people not drinking, that's a whole different movement, like you said.
Yeah.
But I hear people, young people don't drink wine. Since when have young people drank wine? Did you drink wine when you were in your 20s?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in 19.
Good on you. Good on you. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
But like when I was in my 20s,
Yeah.
and the people I knew that were in their 20s,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe late 20s, but not in their
Beer
early
and whiskey.
20s. I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't appreciate it the way, like it was like maybe every once in a while you'd have a beer that would you'd be like, oh, this is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather
What's
than
this thing?
just
It's called an IPA.
just
Cool.
like get it inside of me, like
Yeah.
right, like
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's also just a problem with the United States.
True.
And the approach that there is to drinking and when it's
Restrict it
okay and when
entirely,
it's not.
yeah, yeah.
So, which isn't maybe another conversation, but
Yeah.
like to me, I don't know. I don't know if there's ever been a big market for wine in the 21 to 25 crowd in general.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's something that most people kind of grow into. So
Yeah.
you're very esteemed to be drinking such high quality juice at such a young age.
No, I was like, no, it was not high quality. No, it was like a $10 bottle of wine. I paid my girlfriend that was a couple years older than me to go buy. And I was like, I guess I got to learn about wine. I'm in the restaurant industry. Yeah, it's that's a really valid point. That's a really great point in the sense of like young people already don't drink wine, right? And like a lot of young people, I think, I'd rather the young people now not drink at all than drink like tons of White Claws and Trulies and just drink to get fucked up, or like create like bad memories around getting drunk, or God forbid DUIs or car accidents or anything like that. I'd rather them approach it in a more holistic kind of setting, or a holistic way, than like just drinking to get wasted. Because I mean, that's
That's what we did for a long time.
that's what we did. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I drank wine, but I still drank to get drunk, right?
Yeah.
Like this is delicious. I'm gonna crush the whole bottle, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now I'm like, I wonder what this drink's like day 2. I'll save myself 2 glasses. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Also, being hungover with a baby is Never
Oh
fun.
no,
Never fun.
Yeah, you only need one or two of
It's the
those at
worst.
most to like to just realize that you got to do better.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's not,
yeah.
and yeah, it's a shameful moment
It's a shameful moment.
that I
yeah.
think most parents have spent. You know,
Oh.
yeah, okay, maybe one a year is what you need, really. You
Yeah.
need one a year
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be like, check yourself, be like, okay, I'm not, 28 anymore, and I don't get the sleep that I used
Yep,
to,
yep.
and,
Yeah, it's brutal. It's I mean maybe I should switch to natural wine. Maybe that's what I need to do. I won't be as hungover. Cool. Okay, so do you want to talk about your wine a little bit?
Sure, yeah, we can talk about so I brought over, the producer is Sanferiolo. The appellation is Doliani, which is an appellation in Piemonte that, unlike most appellations in Piemonte, is focused on a varietal called Dolcetto, which I believe translates to something like little sweet one.
Yeah.
But it has, but I believe that refers to when it's on the vine.
Yeah.
It's not referring to it being traditionally
Sweet
made into
wine.
a sweet wine.
Yeah.
And it's kind of considered the everyday drinker of Dolcetto is of Piemonte. But Doliani is kind of the crown jewel
Like
appellation.
is it a crew?
No, it's an
Okay.
actual DOCG.
Okay, cool. Sick.
Yeah. They have 70 plus MGAs or UGAs, whichever term you want to use,
Yeah,
that somewhat translate to vineyard or crew, if you will. I don't know if I could name any of those for you, but it is an appellation that's specifically known for and requires 100% Dolcetto.
That's awesome.
And this producer, the winemaker, her name is Nicoletta Bocca, I believe. And she's, in my eyes, kind of like the Dolcetto whisperer. And I've had a few other producers' wines, whether it was like a Dolcetto d'Alba or Diano d'Alba. And they tend to be like a little bit more in the medium-bodied camp, and structurally not as intense as the Nebbiolos from the area.
Sure.
So a little bit lower alcohol, a little bit lower acidity, a little bit lower tannin. So just like, once again, kind of falling into that more everyday drinker
Right.
kind of, So this wine kind of turns that back on its head a little bit and says, no, we can make really serious Dolcetto.
Yeah.
And this wine, the vintage is 2015. And I believe this gets held for 3 years in neutral barrels, and then another 4 or 5 years at the winery.
Nuts. So this is basically current vintage.
Yeah, this is basically current vintage.
Wow.
And she makes a few other wines as well, including she makes Nebbiolo and a Barbera, which I believe are both Longue designates. Great. because I think all the vineyards are in Doliani. But this is, of the wines that I've tasted, I thought kind of like the crown jewel wine that she makes. And it's a producer that I wasn't aware of before I started at Alexander Steakhouse. And I've been super stoked to find, because it checks a lot of boxes for people looking for a steakhouse style wine, in that it's got a lot of structure.
Yeah.
But it also has elevated acidity, which is really helpful with the Wagyu element.
Yeah.
Or any fatty cut of
Right,
meat, right?
right.
Just get that palate cleansing element.
Yeah.
And the tannins just, melt with the fat that's
Yeah.
in the meat. And it's a wine that I could put on the list at under $90.
Yeah.
And, I've been fortunate enough to hand sell it to a couple tables, and they were super stoked about it. I do think that it helps to have a decant on it for, 20, 30 minutes,
Sure.
like most structured red
Yeah,
wines.
yeah.
And it does have a little bit of Brett. There's a little bit of funk on it, which, if you're okay with drinking some Italian wine, most of the time people are okay with a little bit of that.
A little bit of funk here every now and then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, but definitely something that I'm excited about. And I want to say, like, this is a bottle, if you were not a buyer, that I think you could probably pick it up in the $35 to $40 range at a place like K&L.
That's great.
But
yeah.
so, and probably impress your friends a little bit with something that isn't your run of the mill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really impressed with this wine, especially considering the cost. I mean, first of all, of course, somebody's going to probably rake me over the coals for this, but I'm trying to think off the top of my head, besides somebody like Giuseppe Quintarelli, right? I don't know a lot of other Italian producers that are holding back for almost a decade.
Yeah, there's, I mean, that's, 9-10 years
Yeah.
there aren't a lot of producers just in general.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they released the highest of high-end Bordeaux
Yeah.
in, 3-4 years,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, if I really racked my brain, I might be able to think of something, but off the top of my head, it's hard to think of one right
Yeah,
now.
like even Vietti Reserva, I think Vietti Reserva Barolo right now is 2016 or 2017's current vintage, so it's even less than this. And then, obviously you go to Spain, you could go Lopez de Heredia, which like
Sure.
current vintage stuff is like 2012,
Remy Uri
2013.
holds back their
Remy Uri.
wines
Great, yeah.
for 10, 12, 13
Yeah,
years,
yeah.
and and their reservas too.
La
Like,
Antigua was one of the ones that we used to represent that also would hold back dramatically, but I think it's a little more prominent in Spain than it is in Italy.
yeah,
So knowing that this is current vintage is super cool, and again, the cost for quality is exceptional, right?
yeah.
I do this little wine rating. I was tasting the 2020 vintage of Isola Elena Chianti Classico, and I was like $40 on wine.com. Like, it's a badass wine for $40, right? Yeah. And similarly, if this is 40 or 40-ish, this is a great bottle of wine, and it's something with age. And like you said, it's also something that you could take this to your friend that's a wine connoisseur if you don't really know a lot about wine and impress the shit out of them. Or you could take this to somebody that doesn't know anything and they could still taste this and taste the quality, right? So
Good. Glad you're enjoying it.
no, it's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah. Are you liking the wine that I poured you?
Mm-hmm. It's got my gears ticking a little bit.
Yeah.
Anytime Somm see a shrouded bottle, then it's like, getting tested on this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's it's ripe and it's got a lot of structure to it, and the alcohol is high, but I think it's well made.
Yeah.
Tastes like it might have a little bit of age on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's but yeah, I've been enjoying sipping on it.
Good. Yeah. It's a producer that you mentioned. So knowing that you're from, none of the wines are blindable, something that I've mentioned in the past, but we've got a little
Yes.
Giornata.
Yeah, for
18
sure.
Chimalaya.
Of course, this is their super Tuscanish style wine.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So when you were...
Oh, good. I'm glad I said that I was okay with it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That wouldn't be...
Wines suck. This wine is great. When I'm having guests, I'm trying to pick a bottle that's like thoughtful, right? And it's hard sometimes. So one of my guests was Henaro. He's from Spain. And I opened like this like really weird esoteric white from Cadiz, right? And he goes, "Is it blindable?" I go, "No." And the same thing, right? This is I think they say on the front of the bottle, it's 35 Sangio from Linomata, 25 Merlot from Margarita Vineyard, 20 Merlot from Jim Black Vineyard, and 20 Sangio from Creston Ridge Vineyard. 2018 red wine. So it would be highly impressive if you
California Super Tuscan.
California
I
Super
totally
Tuscan.
had it right here.
Yeah. So I like this wine a lot. I know you're from the area or around the area, and so I thought about showing this to you because I think you have the Nebbiolo on the menu.
Yeah, we have the Nebbiolo and the Aglianico.
The Aglianico, we got blinded the other day. The other day is a very loose term for me. This was like 9 months ago. We got blinded as a team on the Giornata Aglianico, and I think it was Alois Campole Aglianico from Campania, and none of us could figure out which one was domestic. We just couldn't pick it, right?
Yeah.
We narrowed it down because we knew that it was laterals. It was something that was domestic and something that was non-domestic. And so we tasted the Nebbiolo. We tasted whatever other things. The Vermentino that they do is really great too. And then we got down to the end of it and we're like, okay, so what else do they make? They make Aglianico. These are both clearly Aglianico. And then he's like, which one's New World? Which one's Old World? And all of us were just like floored. We couldn't figure it out. And,
pretty rustic and that varietal is known for just having all the muscle.
Yeah, power.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see though, kind of how Tarasi to me almost has like a lighter characteristic in some ways. It's more reserve, and there's probably more oak tannin in most cases. But I love Aglianico. It's a grape that I don't feel like I see enough of. But I mean, arguably, like, where are you gonna sell it, right? A16.
Yeah.
Obviously, they would sell it, but
Yeah, I've got a few. We've got a few on the list over at
That's great.
Alexander's.
Yeah.
And I think once again, like the value camp.
Yeah.
It's like you could easily spend this much money on a big Barolo times 2.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, if I put Salvatore Molitieri, on 2013
Yeah.
on, it can be at 120.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were spending that on a big Barolo, 240 probably.
Yeah.
A lot of the time
Yeah.
anyway.
Encourages people to get a second bottle half the time. Yeah.
That's another appellation where you see some people holding back.
Yeah. That's true.
Their wines.
Yeah.
I don't know. Master Berardino, I want to say Radici is on like 2017 right now.
Yeah.
So they're holding it back some for sure.
Yeah.
I
know our Pepe kind of got flooded in the market with old vintage, but I think it was like a private seller.
Yeah, that's a good. And there's a couple of distributors.
Yeah.
For our Pepe too.
Chaos. It's wild, wild west out here.
Yeah, and I was we had some of their Il Petit Rosso on, which is kind of like it's their intro Valtellina Superiore, if you will.
Yeah.
That I was picking up last year and serving with the carbonara on the tasting menu, and it was, I think, 2016. So I think that was the current vintage.
That's
for it.
great.
So they definitely still hold back their
Okay,
wines,
good,
I
good,
think.
good.
But yeah,
Emilio Pepe, I guess, holds back.
Sure.
Valentini, right? Like maybe some of like the super premium producers.
Yeah.
Again, I mean,
Paolo
like
Bay.
Quintarelli, like I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I guess none of the. To think that something this inexpensive when Quintarelli Amarone is on a list for 400 plus a bottle.
Yeah.
Emilio Pepe is like what 400-ish
At least.
Valentini is 280 plus a bottle. To have something like this, right, from somewhere that's a little less known for just a little less known, right? Doliani is a little less known than say like
people don't know
or whatever.
Dolcetto like they know Montepulciano.
Yeah,
or they know
exactly.
those names that you just brought up.
Yeah. So that's cool. I'm excited. And equally so, it's nice to see some things that are done domestically that are reminiscent of old world wines. I think Brian does a really great job. He's purposely not trying to be like Cal-Italian, right? He wants to just like let the grapes represent themselves as they will. But like you mentioned earlier, it's and like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to pick between his wines and classic Italian wines in a way. And I think that's super impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great to be able to like kind of get out of your own way. You have good fruit, you have a good climate, you have a lot of things going for you. You're like, you know what? I'm going to add a razzle dazzle this vintage. I'm going to add fuck tons of oak, and then it just doesn't work out.
Right.
So I applaud him for that, and I need to go to Edo. I really want to try it. We get some of his pasta every year.
Yeah.
He sends all the reps like a little bit of pasta.
Nice.
And it's great. He's a total sweetheart.
They have a little store that you can pick up different foods and wines, and of course they have their wines. But I guess they're making an Amaro now, so I picked it up. I haven't plugged into it yet, but I picked it up, and so I'll get back to you about that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I just remembered just now that I brought it home.
That's so
and I'm
cool.
like, all right, maybe tonight I'll go
Yeah,
home and
yeah.
I'll continue the. I feel like I was like plugging Giornata without even knowing.
You were, yeah.
Gosh,
yeah,
jeez.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It's all subliminal. Yeah. Yeah, you know who else makes a really cool Amaro is Marjoram. Have you had their Amaro?
Yeah. We carried it at Fiorella actually.
Oh yeah.
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 Yep. And that was the first anything that I ever had from Marjoram.
Yeah.
So I just associated with them with, I was like, oh yeah, they make their Amaro and they put Grenache in it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until a few years later, I think, that I had some of their still wines.
Sauv Blanc or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had is it Sybarite?
Sybarite.
Yeah, we had that. Chris Tarbell picked that up for the Sunset location at Fiorella, and then and then I had some of their Grenache somewhere else at a lunch that I went to. That was just really just crystalline,
great wines.
And for sure.
Yeah. The Amaro was one that, like, right when I started at Chambers, I was like, what is this? And I tried it and I was like, I'm gonna need a couple bottles every now and then. It's a little tipple at the end of the night every night is good. And all the botanicals are coming from Doug's personal garden, and it's all Solera. So, like, I think this is the 13th vintage, or maybe the 14th
cool.
vintage.
I had no idea.
And I guess when he, like, empties it out, it's just like there's just like sludge in the bottom of the barrel. It's all these, like, leftover sediment or whatever from all the botanicals that are in there. So something else I was going to ask you was in regards to Alexander's, and obviously this is maybe a tangent off of the wine side of things, but I imagine you guys probably do really well on whiskey sales too, right? I feel like people that are going out to eat at a steakhouse know that they're going to spend money and are usually a little bit more kind of like, I don't want to use the word frivolous, usually a little bit more friendly with their budget.
Yeah, I think that most people associate the steakhouse in general, or at least that style of steakhouse, with, okay, we're going to spend a little bit more than we would at a normal dinner that we go to tonight. And in that way, like, they might be willing to open up a little bit more in that way.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think, like, more than ever, we have, like, date night couples coming in and sharing a porterhouse.
Yeah.
So, like, which is probably more than enough meat for two people.
Yeah, it's
even
probably
though
the right decision.
Even though we encourage, people to enjoy the steak. Each enjoy a steak. So yes, I think that, people are ready and willing to spend a little bit more, but sometimes that's already built into just the price rise that comes with the steakhouse prices on the dinner menu. And insofar as, it's definitely like people going very brown liquor centric place, lots of whiskey, lots of rye, lots of scotch, and tons of high end. Like, we have so much whiskey at Alexander's. Like, I mean, I'm still wrapping my head around it. And I'm not beverage director. I am just, the wine guy.
Wine program's still pretty sick.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And it, obviously I still need to understand the spirits program and know what we have that's available. But most of the time, my conversations, if they're centered around that, it's, do you know any cool cocktails that, and then, trying to find a profile for that. Like, I would a wine, but this time for a cocktail kind of thing. Like, I love lemon drops. Hey, maybe I'll throw a Corpse Reviver too or something, and, like, see if they.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, like, not the same, but has some of the same
similar
feel,
elements,
right?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
that one in particular has worked well for me.
That's cool.
For people that are willing to be adventurous, like, and put that in my hands, like that one works pretty well.
I feel like that's kind of the beauty of the hospitality industry that I really love, is that, sometimes people are willing to come in and they're willing to just kind of, like, trust you or take your recommendations, and they're kind of just there for the experience. James Lynn, a guy that we used to work with at Ozumo, he would always say, like, people go out to eat to escape reality, right? It's a mini vacation. It's just going out. It's just like, you really just want to be able to, like, get away for a minute. And, some people come in and they, have been on Yelp or they've been on Instagram and they go, like, this is what I want. Like, I know what I want. I don't want anything else. I want this cocktail because it's cute. I want this dish because it's going to make a great Instagram story. And that's fine. But I think, man, I love when somebody comes in and they're just like, what do you like? Or, like, what's something that you're interested in recently? Because, like, I don't feel like we get that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes it might be someone who's either A, spent some time in the industry, or B, is in the industry when that happens. But not always. And and when that happens for me, I share the same excitement as you. Like, I'm just like, hey, like, this is what I've opened recently that I thought was showing really well. And, once I've dialed in like what style of wine or whatever it is that they're looking for, then kind of make a couple suggestions. And yeah, that's always fun to share something that's not, something like this or something like this that, you're kind of getting behind. You're trying to put out there for people to start getting excited about too.
A little more off the beaten path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like the chances of them remembering that versus them just ordering the same thing that they normally do or whatever, bringing that bottle that they would normally bring, which by all means, I've brought that up a couple times, and I do want to say I remember that feeling.
Yeah.
I remember the feeling of what is this crazy book that I'm looking at? This is like, and the corkage is like your security blanket.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, I know what this is.
Yeah,
it's good. I like it.
Yeah.
I can drink it here.
Yeah.
Please let me. Like, I remember that feeling. I remember, when I first started going out for nice dinners and started drinking a little wine and just like, dude, I don't trust any of this other stuff. I don't want anything weird. I don't trust your agenda.
Yeah, or you get burnt once or twice and you get oversold and you're just like, fuck.
Totally.
I'm just going to bring my own thing from now on.
And I remember that feeling and I also remember, so the other day, someone who works at the restaurant with me, I was like, hey, I haven't looked at the wine list in a while. Can I look at the wine list? And I was like, sure. And it was back of the house. And they looked at it, they paged through like 3 or 4 pages, and they were like, wow, this is really overwhelming, isn't it? And I was like, oh yeah, that's the way that most people feel.
Yeah.
And I remember that too.
Yeah.
So, and I totally get it. Not everybody wants to talk to sommelier, wine person. Yeah. I get it. Because they might assume that there is an agenda, or
I'm just gonna gouge you.
They just don't want to talk to me, or whatever. And I get that. So the way that I can help in that way is like, once again, just having some wines on the list that are at approachable prices from a few different places. Yeah. And then when they do order it, like I haven't talked to them yet, I'll go by with the bottle, introduce myself, and just give them be like, hey, are you familiar with the wine?
Yeah.
Have you had any of their wines before? And if the answer is no, then I'll just give them a really quick rundown.
Yeah.
Before we open.
Little nuggy.
And then if they're like, oh, well, normally I drink X, and this is not X.
Yeah. It's your chance to
then I'm like, hey, maybe we'll, just so you know, this is not going to drink in that style.
Yeah.
So in a way, still have the conversation with them, but in their safer spot.
Yeah.
Where it's not, we're not starting cold,
Yeah. Because that's always, it's funny, like you mentioned earlier, when somebody's kind enough to like give you a price range, because that's one of the big challenges. Like when you're first a Somm, and like when I was at Boulevard, I'd go like, if you want to have a really excellent occasion, here's this. If you're looking for something really delicious, here's this. And one of my favorite things that's under the radar is this, right? Nice. And I would give them like a $200 bottle, $100 bottle, and then a sub $100 bottle or whatever. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with at the beginning. But anytime somebody can give you a price, like, I don't care. You come out, you want to spend $100 on a bottle of wine, great. You want to spend $50 or $60 on a bottle of wine, great. We'll find something. We'll make it work, But it kind of touches back on what we've talked about in the past. It's like the wine industry sometimes can feel like so judgy and so like kind of like elitist that I feel like it intimidates so many people just unintentionally. Like a lot of the Somms that I know that work at 3 stars or 2 stars or whatever are the nicest, most calm, most humble people ever. And they're not rude at all. But like sometimes people go into those settings and they feel so uncomfortable that like one little thing can set them off. Like you said, they might just not want to talk to a Somm because they just don't want to talk to anybody, right? And they know that there's that level of uncomfort. And like you said, there's times I've gone in and look at lists and I'm like, what am I looking at? You know, it's like 120 pages. It's a bunch of producers that even I don't know. And I go like, I don't know. And then you're sitting there and the server comes back and they're like, have you decided? And you've been looking at the book for 10 minutes and you go like, not yet. And they go like, should we get some appetizers going? You go like, yeah, it's a lot. It can be really overwhelming.
Yeah. It's, I mean, and I think a lot of people do this now too, but not everybody offers it. But if I'm going to a restaurant like that I know has a big list and that I'm excited to look at the list, I'll try to find a list online first.
Yeah.
Just, well, so I don't bore the hell out of my wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's very sweet and very accommodating and totally wants me to enjoy that process, but also doesn't want me to be sitting, I don't think want me to be sitting in front of the list for 35, 40 minutes or whatever. Yeah. Like, and also the server doesn't want me to be sitting there for that long, without an order in.
Yep.
So of course not everywhere puts their list online.
It's hard.
So that can put, but that's something that I'll try and do times anyway.
I feel like it's the opposite for me. I don't look at it before I go because then I sit here all day and I talk to Bianca and I go, oh, look, they have this. Oh, look, they have this. She goes like, shut up. Like, stop talking.
In the candy store. Huh?
Yeah. It's just like, what if we did a bottle of this and a bottle of this? And she goes, Chris, we don't need 2 bottles of wine. I go like, but we could take them home and we can drink them later and look at this price. Yeah. It's obviously, as you can see, we have a massive shortage of wine. No, it's always, I'm excited to start trading bottles with some of my other friends and just kind of like taste more. Because outside of like you bringing this and Vince bringing the wine that he brought yesterday, is like, I don't really get to taste a lot of stuff that's outside of the books that we represent. And so it's really cool to see the things that are out there and see the things that people like yourself are excited about. And I think this wine's dope.
Right on, man. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
What, let's see. Any words of wisdom for the people out there? Any kind of closing statements you want to give? Or
well, I think what you just touched on, that like, I think that there's still this idea that the wine person, wherever at the restaurant or the store, is like this snooty person that wants to put you down.
Yeah.
And I think that still exists,
Yeah.
but I think it's much, much, much less than it used to be.
Yeah.
And the emphasis that I've seen from the other wine professionals that I know and from the educators that I know is the opposite. It's be approachable, be their advocate, be on their side. Yeah. And that takes you back to just the hospitality focus of it, right? Just like, we're here for you.
Yeah.
And so it's okay if you feel intimidated to talk to that person, but that person should never make you feel intimidated.
Yeah.
Or feel bad about a price point that you're looking in. It should be gracious and understanding and trying their best. Now, I can't guarantee you that they're always going to find you a bottle of wine that you like.
Right.
It just like, we all have shot and missed before.
Yeah.
But what I will say is for me personally, if I sell you a bottle of wine and I tell you about it and you don't like it, I want to know.
Yeah.
Because I want to get something in front of you that you like.
Yeah.
And like, it's, we're not in this scenario. This isn't when we're talking about blue chip stuff.
Yeah.
Like, because people buying blue chip stuff know what they're getting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of flexibility on my side of things. And to be like, no, let's reassess. Let me pour you something that I already have that's open and see if you like that a little bit more. And I'll like I said earlier, I'll educate the staff with the wine. I'll offer it BTG, whatever it might be. So just know that, like, I think this is other things like, oh, you're not, you're tasting the wine to make sure it's sound, not that you like it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, man, I really want you to like the wine.
Yeah.
I really want you to like this.
That's a great point.
I do not want you. So like, maybe proper is the wine sound? No, that's my job.
Yeah.
fancy restaurants to make sure that the wine is clean. It's your job to tell me whether or not you like it.
Do you enjoy the wine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like sometimes there may be a suggestion there, oh, well, maybe we'll try a decant and see if that helps it open up. It might not immediately be let's get a different bottle, but eventually, at least I'll say for me personally, I just want to get something in front of the guests that they like.
Yeah.
So I try to be as approachable as I can in that way. So if you run into me, that's what I'm hoping for in that case.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. Well, anything else you want to add?
No, thank you for having me on.
Hey, man.
Thanks for the delicious wine.
Likewise.
And good luck with everything.
Thanks.
All right.
Let's do it again soon.
Salud.
Salud.